My name is Max, and I weigh 22 pounds. Some humans find this an exaggeration. What an enormous cat, they say. They don't understand. That weight isn't fat, it's purpose. I am a Maine Coon. I was made to have substance. Right now, I am using all my purpose. I am lying across my human's chest, Arthur, with my front paws on his left shoulder and my chin resting on him. He's in the old leather armchair. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's not the empty silence of months ago. It's a peaceful silence. The late afternoon light streams through the window, and I can see Arthur's sketches in the notebook on his lap. He is drawing. He's whistling softly, a tune I can't identify. Arthur stops drawing. His hand, large and rough from time, comes to my back. He pets me, and I feel the purr vibrate against his chest. He says softly, "You're a good weight, Max. A very good weight." But this is not the Arthur I knew 1 year ago. The Arthur from a year ago didn't draw. He didn't whistle. He barely breathed. He was a 55-year-old man who smelled of old coffee and longing. A man who had forgotten his own weight. I always understood the world through two presences. There was Arthur, and there was Elisa. Arthur was the structure, the oak. He smelled of sawdust, strong coffee, and earth. His voice was low thunder. He fixed things. He read thick books. He was the human I climbed when I wanted to see the world from above. Elisa was the music, the garden. She smelled of lavender, fresh bread, and sun. Her voice was song. She spoke to me in long, sweet sentences. She was the human in whose lap I nestled when I wanted warmth. My life was a perfect balance, structure and music, thunder and sun. Then, one day, the music stopped. It was sudden. First, the house was full of humans I didn't know. They spoke quietly and hugged Arthur. His daughter, Laura, who hadn't lived here for a long time, came back. She smelled of saltwater tears and slept in her old room. Elisa did not come back. The smell of lavender and fresh bread was replaced by the smell of dust and flowers dying in water. After a few days, the extra humans left. Laura stayed a bit longer, but she also had her own home, her own balance. Eventually, she hugged Arthur for a long time, petted my head, and left. And then, it was just us, Arthur and me, and the house fell silent. The silence was deafening. It was a heavy silence, heavier than me. A vacuum that sucked all the sound. Arthur began to shrink. Not physically, of course. He was still a large man, but his presence diminished. He moved through the house like a shadow, a ghost in his own life. He stopped going to the workshop out back. The smell of sawdust vanished. He stopped cooking. The smell of strong coffee was replaced by the smell of stale bread and food spoiling in the refrigerator. He sat. Sometimes he sat in her rocking chair on the porch. Sometimes in his leather armchair in the living room. For hours. He didn't read. He didn't watch television. He just existed. Staring at a spot on the wall only he could see, he was carrying a weight, an invisible weight that was crushing him. I could see it in his slumped shoulders, in the way he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the center of the earth. The problem is, I didn't understand this weight. Human grief is a strange thing. They miss something that is no longer there. It's a pain caused by an absence. My world is simpler. My world is made of presence. My routine was broken. The food bowl went empty. The litter box, dirty. The water, still. In the first few days, I meowed. I sat by the empty bowl and meowed, that sharp cry I knew he hated. He would get up, like an automaton, and fill the bowl. Then he would go back to sitting. He was disconnecting, floating away. I tried Elisa's method. I climbed into his lap in the armchair. I nestled. I purred as loud as I could, hoping the warmth would bring him back. He petted me, but it was an automatic petting. His eyes were still fixed on that spot on the wall. His hand was cold. He was touching me, but he wasn't with me. I wasn't enough. The warmth wasn't enough, I realized. Arthur didn't need warmth. He needed weight. His life had been defined by responsibility. Caring for Elisa, caring for Laura, caring for the house. Now, Elisa was gone. Laura was grown. The house was crumbling in silence. He no longer had a weight to carry, and the invisible weight of absence was winning. So, I made a decision. If Arthur needed a weight, I would be that weight. That night, he was in the armchair. The same lost look, the same shallow breathing. I jumped into his lap. He started the ghost petting. I didn't stop there. I stood up. I placed my large, heavy front paws on his chest, and I climbed. Arthur blinked, surprised. It was the first real expression I had seen on him in weeks. He said, "Max, what are you?" I didn't stop. I kept climbing, awkwardly, until all 4 of my paws were on his chest. He had to lean back to balance me. I turned once, twice, and I lay down, with all 10 of my kilos, directly over his heart. It was uncomfortable, for both of us. I barely fit. Arthur tried to adjust me. He muttered, "Buddy, you're too big for this. Get down." He pushed me lightly. I resisted. I dug my claws lightly into his flannel shirt and refused to move. I stared him down, directly in the eyes. And then, I purred. Not a soft purr. A purr like a V8 engine. A purr that vibrated through his ribcage. I was saying, "I am here, I am heavy, and you will not ignore me." He sighed. But it was different. It wasn't the sigh of sadness. It was a sigh of resignation. He said, "All right, stubborn. You win." His hand came to me. This time, it wasn't cold. He had to use his arm muscle to hold me in place. He had to shift in the chair to accommodate my weight. He couldn't look at the spot on the wall anymore. He had to look at me. I became a living blanket. That night, for the first time in weeks, Arthur didn't sit up until dawn. He fell asleep there, in the armchair, with me on his chest. His sleep was restless, but it was sleep. The new routine began. I woke him up in the morning, not by meowing, but by jumping on the bed and settling on his chest until the weight forced him awake. He read in the armchair. I climbed onto his chest. He had to hold the book with one hand and hold me with the other. It was inconvenient. It was a constant physical reminder. He tried to work at the computer. I would lie across his shoulders like an expensive, very heavy fur stole. He had to straighten his posture to balance me. He grumbled. He called me a furry monster and a 10-kilo shadow. But he was talking. His voice, the thunder, was coming back. I became his weight, his responsibility. He had to feed me because I reminded him. He had to clean my box because I watched him. He had to move because I demanded it. But winter came, and Arthur's grief found an ally in the cold. The house, once so well cared for, began to protest. The heater made strange noises. A leak started in the kitchen. Arthur put a bucket under it. The sound of plock, plock, plock became the new soundtrack to the silence. Arthur was doing the minimum, just enough for us to survive. The invisible weight was still there, and some days it was stronger than me. Then the storm came. It wasn't an ordinary rain. It was one of those November storms, with wind that howled like a wolf and rain that hit the windows like stones. We were in the living room. Arthur was in the armchair. I was at my post, on his chest. The sound of the storm was making me anxious. My ears swiveled with every gust. Arthur was quiet. Too quiet. Then we heard it. A sharp creak, and then a terrible sound of shattering glass. It came from the guest room, Laura's old room. I leaped from Arthur's chest and ran to the hallway. Arthur followed me, but slowly, like he was moving underwater. When we reached the room, the scene was chaotic. The corner window, the one Arthur always said needed replacing, had given in. The glass was shattered. Rain and wind poured in violently, knocking a small vase of dried flowers off the dresser. The curtain flew horizontally. The water was soaking the carpet. I hate water. I recoiled, hissing at the broken window. Arthur stopped at the door. He looked at the water, at the glass, at the rain, and he did nothing. He just watched. He watched as the rain soaked the room he and Elisa had decorated together. I saw his shoulders slump. The invisible weight pinned him in place. He muttered, "It doesn't matter. Let it." And he turned to leave, to go back to the armchair, to give up. I panicked, not because of the rain, but for him. The silence was winning. I ran in front of him, blocked his path. I looked up at him and let out the loudest, most guttural meow I had. It wasn't a request for food, it was a roar. He tried to step around me. "Move, Max!" I didn't move. I ran to the closet door in the hallway, the closet where he kept his tools. I scratched the door, hard. The sound of wood splintering echoed in the hall. I looked at him, scratched again, and meowed. "What is it, cat? I don't—" I ran back to the wet room, hissed at the window, and ran back to the tool closet. Scratch, meow, stare. I was screaming at him in the only language I knew. "You are the structure. You are the oak. You fix things. Do something." Arthur stopped. He looked at me, scratching the door. He looked at the room, where the rain was now forming a puddle. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. When he opened them, the ghost look was gone. There was something there. Anger. Frustration. But it was something. He said, "Damn it, cat. Damn it." He didn't go to the armchair. He ripped open the tool closet. The smell of oil and metal filled the hall. He grabbed a hammer, nails, a tarp, and some boards that were stored there. He marched to the room. I followed him, keeping a safe distance from the water. He didn't stop. He climbed onto the dresser, fighting the wind, and began to nail the tarp over the hole. He got soaked. He swore when the hammer hit his thumb. But he was moving. He was making noise. He was fixing. It took almost an hour. When he finished, he was panting, soaked, and covered in grime. But the window was sealed. The wind was outside. He sat down on the hallway floor. I approached him. He looked at me, and he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was an exhausted, shaky laugh. He said, "You're a real pain, you know that? A 10-kilo pain in the neck." He pulled me into his wet lap. I didn't care. He hugged me tightly. He said, "Thank you, buddy." That day, the sound of the leak in the kitchen stopped. The next day, he fixed the roof. And the next week, he opened the workshop door. I followed him in. The place smelled of dust and memories. Things were covered in sheets. He walked to a workbench in the corner. There was a small object there, a birdhouse, half sanded, half rough, unfinished. Arthur ran his fingers over the wood. He said, "We were going to finish this for the garden." He stood there for a long time. I jumped onto the workbench, careful not to knock anything over. I sat next to the unfinished project and placed my paw on his hand. He looked at me. He turned on the radio. Classical music filled the silence. He picked up the sandpaper. and got back to work. Today is 1 year since that day. The house smells of sawdust and coffee again, and, sometimes, lasagna. Arthur still has his bad days. The invisible weight never disappears completely. It's a scar, but he doesn't sink anymore. I make sure of that. The birdhouse is hanging in the garden tree. The garden Arthur has started to tend to again. Right now, his phone rings on the table beside him. It's Laura. Before, he would have let it ring. Now, he settles me on his chest with one hand and answers with the other. "Hi, honey. Yes, I'm fine." "No, you didn't interrupt. I was just here, drawing." Max is, of course, on top of me, heavy as a small pony. "Yes, I ate. I made that stew." He smiles. I close my eyes and turn up my purr. Arthur needed a weight, something to anchor him to this world, to remind him he was still needed. Grief is an absence. It's a cold hole. But love, humans, love is a presence. It's the warmth. It's the structure. Love is a weight. The good weight of responsibility. I am not Elisa. I am just a cat. But I weigh 22 pounds. And sometimes that's exactly the weight you need to keep you pinned to the earth.